Hello folks, once again we're just going to go through another article, this time Times of Israel and Netanyahu to the global business leaders this year in Jerusalem, and this was held at a conference in Munich, which I'd mistakenly thought was in Israel, and I'd said that Christine Lagarde from the IMF was in Israel, but actually it was in Munich in Germany. So you can see there, Sikh kids sinned, Rabbi faces UK ban. Well, let's hope they all get banned. In fact, they shouldn't even be here. The edict of expulsion never expired, even though that was a crock with the Domus Conversorum. Anyway, so PM tells global business leaders this year in Jerusalem. Now that's supposed to be like a tagline this year in Jerusalem that Jews use. I'll just make this a bit bigger, maybe you can see the font. So ahead of Munich Security Conference. So security, generally you're talking about, well, arms trading, you're talking about maybe financial securities under security markets. Maybe you're also talking about internet security. G4S, which is a big security firm in UK, they're an Israeli outfit. Also, Israel and China are having lots and lots of trade links now, as China's buying into Israel. And if you've been following either my blog, Peter Cooney Enabler .wordpress.com or mossadwatch.blogspot.com. There are others, but if you've been following those two, you'll know that China got all the money from the West, from America, via the slush funds and, you know, the investments into China, and China has been trying to invest it into Africa to give returns on the pensions. Well, you know, that's never going to take shape because Israel is totally dominant in Africa, and Africa will never be prosperous as long as they have their hand in that. So China and Israel, look it up yourself, they're having tons and tons of investments into each other. So in this, ahead of Munich Security Conference, back to this article, Netanyahu promises to CEOs that he's cutting taxes and regulations and boasts of Israel's cyber prowess. So if you've been following anything about anyone, they've been talking about like Talpiot, Unit 8200. Well, this article goes into it. Not Talpiot, but Unit 8200. So Munich, Germany, there was no mention of Iranian drones or corruption investigations in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's remarks to 38 CEOs and board chairmen ahead of the Munich Security Conference on Friday. His focus was singular: bring foreign investment to Israel. So everyone knows, you know, incentives. Like, I grew up in a modern town which was full of American factories, Kraft, AC Delco, like there was just loads of them, and the whole town just fell apart after those incentives for those companies to be there. And this is generally how multinational corporations work in internationalism. They're given incentives to come to lands with, you know, to like tax-free tax or lesser tax than the countries where they may have started. So it's like a redistribution of labour, you know, of jobs that can be given. The incentives are there. For example, EU paid all of the farmers in England not to grow crops, in the west of Europe, while the east of Europe caught up, paid them not to grow crops in the supermarkets in Europe. so much of the food is from out of Europe, from Chile, from Israel, from wherever it's from. It's never from Europe, or at least the price for the European goods will be much escalated because the incentives are there for the outside corporations to buy the farming produce from even further afield, because an apple that's grown in the same country as where the supermarket is, then that can be like 4 times more expensive than an apple that's travelled halfway around the world. So a balance on those figures doesn't buoy up a protectionist system. Now, President Xi and Christine Lagarde have both said that they don't want protectionism. So here you go, we want protectionism. So come and see me personally, he told the financiers. I'll take the time. Netanyahu, touting his credentials as a former finance minister and private business consultant, boasted to all male business leaders and the head of International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, the lone female participant. Well, that's debatable if she's female or he's female. That Israel's economy was doing well and getting better. Well, it's doing fantastic. I mean, they're just on the freeload, aren't they? The Prime Minister was in top form at the lunch meeting at Munich's Bayerischer Hof Hotel Spa, cracking jokes, dropping names and praising Israeli financial achievements and technological breakthroughs. The meeting came 3 hours before the official start of the Munich Security Conference, a 3-day conflab, that should say not confab, in which Prime Ministers and senior officials from around the world, including British Premier Theresa May, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, and US National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, will discuss the pressing defence and diplomatic issues of the day. Come to Israel. The Prime Minister tried to tantalise the CEOs with the prospect of a well-funded, less taxed, less regulated Israeli market. Less regulated. It's a free-for-all. This year in Jerusalem, he said, riffing off an oft-heard Jewish saying, he vowed to cut taxes for businesses in order to encourage them to come to Israel, citing the United States' recent tax code overhaul as a major motivating factor in his decision to drop taxes further. So there he is with the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Wolfgang Ischinger. So if we have to, we will push it to the ground, he said. The current corporate tax rate in Israel is 23%. He joked that he serves on 2 ministerial committees. Now remember, this guy was in the IDF for 25 years, and he was special forces within the IDF. The Security Cabinet and Regulations Committee, which should really be called the Anti-Regulations Committee. Netanyahu stressed Israel's technological breakthroughs, as well as the private and government investment in fields like cybersecurity and medicine. That's because the Jews are all behind all of the pharmaceuticals and the street drugs. They're the 2 things that they do. It's not medicine at all. Take some sugar with your medicine. And cybersecurity, well, cybersecurity is all to do with the banking, because they don't want to release non-centralized monetary systems and the insurance markets and stock markets and all of these hoarding principles, hoarding places that they cyber securitize for your pensions, so you pay them to collect for your pensions while they feed you the drugs, and they prosper and your economy suffers. The future belongs to those who innovate. I totally have to agree with that. And it's not only Israel who can be innovative, although in this scenario, in the setting that we're in, economically, financially, politically, only Israel can prosper. So the Prime Minister told business leaders, including the heads of BMW, Siemens used to be called IG Farben, and may do a video series about the documents I've got from there going back on the prosperous years of National Socialist Germany. Very interesting document, but it's all in German, never been released in English, and I got that from Siemens themselves, and they said this document's never been published, even though the page that I'd found it on did say that it would be published at the time, or by the time I'd been looking at it, it'd been published already. So I emailed Siemens and they sent me this document, which is brilliant. Anyway, maybe I'll do something on that. Raytheon and Deutsche Telekom, so they were the business leaders, including them, and there was 68 of them there. You have a lot more wealth being created by a lot fewer people, which makes some policy problems for people like us who earn their living from the voters and not from the shareholders. So basically, with him being a Prime Minister, a politician, he's saying that he makes money from the voters. The Prime Minister also acknowledged that the way technology companies make money compared to energy and manufacturing businesses presents a challenge to governments. You have a lot more wealth being created by a lot fewer people, which makes some policy problems for people like us. I'll just reiterating that, sorry, that was a quoted phrase. But basically, a lot of the Jews are all billionaires because of asset value, and yet if you strip down their assets, was it Bear Stearns, I think one of the big banking Wall Street banks before 2008 was said to be worth 80 billion, it was like an investment bank. And then the Glass-Steagall Act came and that gave them allowance to be a commercial bank as well. So when the books were looked into, they were actually minus 40 billion in debt, and that's how they crashed. Pretty sure it was Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers, or maybe Lehman Brothers bought them out or whatever. But there's the discrepancy. 1 minute you're 80 billion in the black, and next minute you're 40 million in the red with the change of law. Well, in America they have the Truth in Lending Act, part of Regulation Z of the IRS code, which they don't have in the City of London. So you can imagine if Netanyahu's saying that there'll be less regulation than even, let's say, London. They've got their own diamond exchange there. The Rothschilds basically paid for Israel, well, not paid, but robbed the money from Russia, Turkey. Well, let's not say Turkey, maybe it was Turkey, but I need to look more into that. But certainly they robbed the money from Russia, from America, from Europe, China, obviously. It will be perhaps one of the most dramatic problems we'll face at the juncture of politics and business, he added. Well, yeah, people are waking up. Netanyahu focused the bulk of his speech on Israel's start-up and high-tech bona fides, which he credited to the country's large investment in its military cybersecurity. Have a listen to these figures. He said the country had the second largest equivalent of the US's National Security Agency in the world, referring to the IDF Military Intelligence's Unit 8200. He then added, for emphasis, I don't know if you heard what I just said. It's the second largest NSA, not in relative terms. The United States is 42 times larger than the State of Israel. Its NSA is not 42 times the size of Israel's NSA. It's not even 10 times the size. The Prime Minister referred to his outsized military unit as a sunk cost that we have put in to survive, which Israel has also tried to turn into an engine for business. I decided that what we'll do is leverage it. We put it smack in the middle of Beersheba's Ben Gurion University in the Negev, which is the desert where no one lives. We will put rail lines that lead to Tel Aviv and build a cyber park Oh, and built a cyber park, which is where they are now, the leading cybersecurity companies, because what they done was with Silicon Valley, they changed it all, the demographic. They basically just sacked all of the American innovators and brought in Indian rich kids just to be part of like the fad. I work in Silicon Valley, and that's why the internet's gone rubbish. The technology is really slowed down, is really slow, and it's just not meeting the standards that like originally Silicon Valley was setting the standard and was flying. So in my opinion, that is a total confession and confirmation that Israel is behind the downfall of America. The Prime Minister illustrated the success of the government's actions to encourage members of Unit A200 to enter into the business world with an anecdote from the visit to Beersheba Cyber Park. So I was recently with Forbes magazine editor-in-chief Malcolm Forbes in Beersheba. I saw there was a young person who looked familiar. He said, "Mr. Prime Minister, a few years ago I was your NSA briefer," he said. I asked him, "What do you do now?" Netanyahu recalled. He said, "What do I do now? Now I'm rich." Well, that's good, isn't it? A rich Jew. The Prime Minister said expanding the government's investment in fields like quantum computing would allow for advances in cracking encryption codes, which are and will be increasingly important to the world. Oh, you bet they'll be increasingly important. They're making it increasingly important, because they do not want the word out on them that they are the crux of this world. If you have the capacity by order and orders of magnitude to have computer power that cracks codes, then our world has just changed power shifts in ways that are not even imaginable. Rewind that and listen to that again. You're talking about money laundering for drugs here, and yet, banks never find who's really behind the money laundering. So we will invest, and in fact we are investing in these areas, not merely to seize the future, but also to protect it. Seizing the future, I mean, I take him literally. No pinches of salt with Netanyahu, I'm telling you. So there you go. This is a follow-on to the Lagarde IMF Israel connection, and I'll upload that now.